Is this slop even edible? The sharp voice cut through the mess hall. A young petty officer stood at the counter, fork tapping against his tray, smirk curling across his face. Seriously, old man, are you going to serve the peas or just stare at them? Tony Maxwell, bent slightly with age but steady in spirit, lifted the spoon with practiced calm. His hands, lined by time, moved with the economy of someone who had learned never to waste energy. Without a word, he placed a portion on the tray. The petty officer sighed, loud and theatrical. "Thank you," he sneered. "This place feels like a retirement home with civilians stumbling around." The insult weighed heavy. Sailors in line avoided eye contact, some staring at their boots, others pretending to scroll their phones. Tony remained unmoved, serving carrots and potatoes as if nothing had been said. But the petty officer would not stop. Hanging near the end of the line, he spoke louder, feeding his arrogance. Probably shuffled papers in a supply depot for 20 years, and now thinks ladling food makes him important. His laugh was sharp and empty. A lieutenant with a clipboard appeared, his voice clipped. "What is the problem here?" The petty officer seized the chance. "It is this server, sir. He is slow and disrespectful." The lieutenant's gaze turned on Tony. "Is this true?" Tony set the spoon down. "I am just serving the food, sir." His voice was quiet, steady. "That is not what I heard," the lieutenant barked. "We expect professionalism from everyone, even contractors. What is your name?" "Tony Maxwell." The lieutenant puffed up, eager to display authority. "Well, Mr. Maxwell, maybe this job is too fast for you. Perhaps it is time to hang up the apron." The petty officer smirked, stepping closer. His eyes caught on the faded tattoo peeking from Tony's rolled sleeve. "What is that supposed to be, old man? Some biker gang back in the day?" The room tensed, but Tony was already elsewhere. The chatter, the trays, even the mocking voice vanished, replaced by the thunder of helicopter blades. He was 19 again, rifle in hand, drenched in sweat and fear, deep in a jungle that seemed endless. On his arm, the tattoo was fresh, etched not for style, but as a vow among brothers, a vow that not all had lived to keep. The vision faded, but the weight of memory lingered. Around him, the mess hall grew quiet, the mocking laughter already hollow against the silence it had stirred. The laughter of the petty officer still echoed faintly when another man in the mess hall straightened in his chair. Chief Petty Officer Graham, a veteran of 3 decades in the Navy, had heard enough. He had ignored the petty cruelty, but the mocking reference to the tattoo struck him like a flare in the night. He turned slowly, his seasoned eyes focusing on the faded ink on Tony Maxwell's arm. Graham knew tattoos, not the kind chosen from a parlor wall, but the kind carved into skin in places that were never supposed to exist on a map. He recognized the wings, the skull, the shadowy design blurred by age. A chill ran through him. He whispered under his breath, "Ghost of the Delta." The lieutenant, unaware of the storm he was walking into, was still posturing. His clipboard snapped against his thigh as he barked about standards and discipline. Tony said nothing, his calm presence only making the lieutenant's anger look childish. Graham rose quietly, not to confront the lieutenant, but to leave the room. He stepped into the hallway and pulled out his phone. His fingers moved quickly across the screen until he found the number few on the base dared to use. When the line connected, a crisp voice answered. "Admiral Miller's office. Ensign Davis speaking." "Ensign, this is Chief Petty Officer Graham. I need you to get a message to the Admiral immediately. Tell her there is a civilian in Mess Hall 3. His name is Tony Maxwell. And tell her it is about his tattoo, the Ghost of the Delta. She will understand." There was silence on the line. Then the ensign spoke, voice hushed. "Understood, Chief. I will deliver the message." Back inside the mess hall, Tony's gaze had returned to the present, but the weight of his memories pressed on him. The lieutenant leaned in closer, his voice dropping into a condescending whisper. "Maybe this job is too fast-paced for you. Maybe it is time to leave it to the young." The petty officer snickered, emboldened by the lieutenant's authority. Tony did not respond. His silence was not surrender but discipline, the same discipline that had once carried him through days and nights where survival was not guaranteed. A memory flashed again, unbidden. The jungle was dense, the air heavy with heat and the smell of damp earth. 19-year-old Tony crouched beside his closest friend, Frank. They sat on an ammunition crate, and Frank held a crude tattoo needle powered by a small battery. With careful precision, he etched the symbol into Tony's arm. The skull, the wings, the shadow. It was their promise, or their mark, their vow, never to abandon one another. Frank had grinned as he finished. No matter what happens, brother, they will know who we were. That vow still lived on Tony's skin, though Frank never made it out of the jungle. The vision passed, and Tony sat quietly, hands steady, while the lieutenant's voice droned with empty threats. The petty officer hovered nearby, convinced he had won some sort of battle. None of them noticed the quiet urgency spreading beyond the mess hall walls. None of them knew that at that very moment, in a command building across the base, Admiral Miller was about to hear a name she thought she would never hear again. Inside the headquarters building, far from the chatter of the mess hall, Admiral Miller sat at the head of a polished mahogany table. Maps and charts glowed on the wall screen as a captain droned through logistics of fleet readiness. Miller's reputation was built on razor focus. Nothing distracted her in moments like this. Until the door opened. Ensign Davis stood stiffly in the doorway, his face pale. Every officer in the room turned to stare. Interrupting a flag-level briefing was unthinkable. The captain stumbled mid-sentence. The admiral raised one eyebrow, a silent command for the young ensign to speak. "Ma'am, I apologize," Davis began, voice low but urgent. "Chief Petty Officer Graham has reported an emergency. He says you must come to Mess Hall 3 immediately. It concerns a civilian server named Tony Maxwell." The name landed in the room with strange weight, but it was the next words that froze the air. "The chief said to tell you, it is about his tattoo. He called it the Ghost of the Delta." The admiral's pen slipped from her fingers and clattered on the table, unnaturally loud in the stunned silence. For the first time in years, her expression cracked. Officers exchanged worried glances, unsure what they were witnessing. "Repeat that," she demanded. "Tony Maxwell, Ghost of the Delta." Her chair screeched back as she rose. "Gentlemen, this briefing is over." Without another word, she strode from the room, Davis hurrying behind her. The charts, the maps, the entire meeting was forgotten. There was only the name and the symbol. As they marched down the hallway, Miller snapped orders. "Ensign, pull every file you can find on Maxwell. Cross-check with records from Unit 734. She did not slow, her mind racing. She had studied the ghosts of the Delta only in classified reports, in whispers of missions conducted where maps ended. A unit that had vanished into the jungle, declared missing in action, never expected to return. Back in Mess Hall 3, events were moving quickly. Tony had been escorted into a small office behind the kitchen. He sat on a plastic chair, hands resting on his knees, while the lieutenant paced with self-importance. The petty officer leaned smugly against the wall, convinced his complaint had succeeded. "So that is how it will be, Mr. Maxwell," the lieutenant said, leaning back in his chair. "Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you off the base. Frankly, you are a liability. Perhaps you are not even fit for this kind of work anymore." The words were meant to humiliate, but Tony sat in stillness. His calmness was a sharp contrast to the bluster filling the room. He had endured far worse than insults. The lieutenant reached for the phone to summon security, and then the office door burst open. It slammed against the wall with such force that every man inside jumped. Framed in the doorway stood Admiral Miller. Her aide was at her side, and a stone-faced Master Chief followed close behind. The sheer weight of their presence changed the air. Out in the mess hall, conversation died mid-sentence. The command was instinctive and thunderous. "Attention on deck." Dozens of sailors and Marines shot to their feet, trays forgotten. Silence fell heavy, waiting for what would come next. Inside the office, the lieutenant's face drained of color. The petty officer's smirk vanished. Admiral Miller's gaze swept past them as if they did not exist. Her eyes locked only on Tony Maxwell. Admiral Miller stepped fully into the cramped office, her presence filling the space like a storm front. The lieutenant and the petty officer snapped to rigid attention, their bodies trembling under the weight of her silence. She ignored their salutes entirely. Her eyes did not waver from the old man seated in the plastic chair. Tony Maxwell looked up, his pale blue gaze calm, almost detached. He did not rise. He did not need to. The Admiral's expression softened as her eyes dropped to the faded ink on his forearm. That symbol, blurred but unmistakable, was something she had only ever seen in sealed reports in yellowed photographs locked away in classified archives. Her voice when she spoke was quiet but carried through the mess hall beyond. That tattoo, I have only seen it in history books and intelligence briefings. Unit 734, the Ghosts of the Delta. The murmur of stunned realization swept across the crowd outside. Miller turned slightly. Master Chief, bring me his file. The old one. Now! The Master Chief disappeared and returned minutes later with a thin folder, worn and creased with age. He handed it to the Admiral. Miller opened it, her jaw tightening as her eyes scanned the faded pages. She looked back to Tony, then straightened her posture. In a clear, commanding voice, she began to read. Anthony Maxwell, recipient of the Navy Cross, awarded the Silver Star with 2 oak leaf clusters, awarded the Bronze Star with Valor Device. Gasps rippled through the room. These were not common decorations. They were reserved for legends. The Admiral's voice grew steadier, louder, her words carrying to the farthest corner of the silent mess hall. Your entire unit was listed missing in action for 6 days. You were the only one who returned. You carried 2 wounded men across more than 30 kilometers of hostile jungle to reach the extraction point. The weight of her words settled over the crowd. Sailors who had moments before looked at Tony with indifference or even scorn, now stared at him in awe. The lieutenant's hand twitched nervously against his thigh. The petty officer's jaw hung slack, terror erasing all trace of arrogance. Then, in a gesture no one expected, Admiral Miller raised her hand in a crisp, perfect salute. The silence deepened, every eye locked on the Admiral, paying respect to a man who had been ladling peas moments earlier. It is an honor, sir, she said, her voice thick with reverence. The mess hall seemed to hold its breath. For a long moment, the scene remained frozen. The Admiral saluting, the old veteran sitting quietly, the crowd of sailors caught between disbelief and shame. Finally, Miller lowered her hand and turned her icy gaze upon the lieutenant and the petty officer. Her voice dropped into a dangerous calm. Lieutenant, petty officer, you have 2 choices. Resign from the United States Navy by the end of the day, or face court-martial for conduct unbecoming and for the public humiliation of a national hero. Her words struck like a hammer blow. Neither man spoke, neither dared. The decision was already written in their ashen faces. Miller turned back to Tony, her tone softening once more. On behalf of the Navy, Mr. Maxwell, I offer our deepest apology. What happened here is disgraceful. The old man's expression remained steady, his silence carrying more weight than any speech. The entire room waited for what he might choose to say. The silence lingered as every eye in the mess hall stayed fixed on Tony Maxwell. He had just been called a legend, decorated with honors most only read about, yet he sat as if nothing had changed. Slowly he lifted his gaze to the lieutenant and the petty officer, who now stood pale and trembling. His voice when it came was steady and calm. Respect, Tony said. It is not in the rank you wear or the uniform you put on. It is in the person you choose to be. You must earn it every single day, from the moment you wake until the moment you sleep. Today you did not earn it. The words carried farther than any shout. They sank into the room like iron into water, undeniable and heavy. Some sailors shifted in discomfort. Others stood straighter, as if reminded of the weight of their own uniforms. As Tony spoke, another memory stirred in his mind, clear as the day it was made. He was 19 again, crouched in a jungle clearing. The air smelled of cordite and wet soil. His best friend Frank, grinning with youthful bravado, pressed a crude needle against Tony's skin, powered by a tiny motor. The wings, the skull, the shadow took form. Frank's voice was eager. No matter what happens, brother, no matter where we end up, they will know who we were. But Frank never walked out of that jungle. The tattoo was all Tony had left of him. It was not decoration. It was a scar, a vow etched in flesh. The vision faded, replaced once again by the sterile walls of the mess hall office. Admiral Miller nodded slowly, as if she too understood the gravity behind the ink. She turned sharply to the lieutenant and petty officer. You are finished here. Security will escort you out. You will not wear this uniform another day. Neither man argued. The petty officer's arrogance had drained into a mask of shame. The lieutenant's hands shook as he lowered his eyes. Within hours, their resignations would be signed, and by evening, they would be gone from the base. Word of what happened spread like wildfire. Mess Hall 3 became a legend retold in barracks and break rooms across the installation. A new training program was launched, ordered personally by Admiral Miller, mandatory courses on naval tradition, history, and the importance of honoring veterans, no matter their station in life. Tony refused invitations to ceremonies. He declined offers to stand on stages or receive applause. He preferred the quiet rhythm of his simple job. Each day, he still ladled peas and mashed potatoes, steady as ever. Weeks later, as the sun dipped low over the base parking lot, a young seaman walked toward the bus stop. He had once laughed at Tony, had joined in the petty cruelty. Now transferred to sanitation duty, his pride was gone. He saw the old man walking slowly across the lot, shoulders straight, eyes on the horizon. The seaman stopped. His throat tightened. An apology would mean nothing. Words could not erase what he had done. Instead, he stood still and gave a slow, deliberate nod. Tony paused. His blue eyes met the young sailor's. For a moment, time stretched thin. Then Tony gave a slight nod in return. Forgiveness. Grace. A lesson that needed no further words. The old man walked on, his steps steady, his figure fading into the glow of sunset. If Tony Maxwell's story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to this channel for more untold stories of quiet heroes who walk among us every day. Your support keeps their legacy alive,